everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of Silver Screen Anomalies. I'm Hallie.
Meow, I'm Skyler.
Are you sure? You sound like maybe you're having an identity crisis there. Or is it just the drugs?
It's the lonely days I spend with my cat.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think that's what causes this meowing fit I have. Also...
And the drugs?
The drugs. I love drugs. I mean, the ones that help me medicate when I'm feeling down, which is a nice segue. So for our lovelies out there, our fan base that tune in every week, I thought a little disclaimer would be, I guess, imperative for this episode.
Maybe a little.
I'm feeling a little ill today. I'm a little under the weather. So if I sound extra attractive today, it's because A, feeling a little under the weather, B, hopped up on all of the medication. I just did a shot of Buckley, so I'm feeling... Shots.
You didn't do it.
It takes me back to college. I can't do it. It's too many
We talked about this. I thought you were going to do it with me. You know what? Never mind.
Too much PTSD. Yeah, sorry. That being said, so anyway, I apologize in advance if I sound a little unusual compared to my usual... speaking voice. I'm a little congested, so apologies to the fan base, but we're still gonna deliver you an episode anyway.
That's right.
I'm doing it for you.
All for you. All for the fans.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are new to the podcast, we like to discuss movies here and review them and give them scores. And we are not spoiler free. I cannot emphasize that enough. We are going to spoil whatever we're talking about. Mm-hmm. No filters here.
We spoil the shit out of everything.
And we're salty as fuck.
We sure are. And I mean, there's a good reason behind that, because we like to cover these shows at length. We like to actually make sure that what we're discussing, it's a no holds bar conversation. We are hitting all the points and covering everything that we can about the content. So this is for people who've consumed the content, more or less.
That's right.
Speaking of consuming...
that's a great segue right there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, Hallie, why don't you intro what we're covering today?
Today, we are covering Dracula, the BBC production that came out just this year.
Yeah.
And is released on Netflix for your viewing pleasure.
That's right. You can consume this show now.
Twice in one episode?
That's all I got.
Okay.
Well, trust me, there will be more jokes later, I promise.
Will they be good jokes?
Nope. More on that later. So, Dracula. Now, this show is very much falling in line with a trend that we've been doing on this show as of late, which is because January is the dumping ground of Hollywood, there's not a whole lot in the realm of movie content for us to cover, not unless we want to go see some sort of direct-to-video junk that just isn't going to be fun for anyone to listen to, nor is it going to be fun for us to watch. So instead, we've decided to cover some really hot-ticket items on the streaming service networks that are at your disposal, namely Netflix as of late, because we also covered in our last episode, The Witcher. So if you want to get an idea of the formatting and the slight differences in how we cover TV shows versus movies, look no further than that episode, which is episode 11. Now, with Dracula, this show is a mini-series, so it actually contains 3 episodes. Each are 90 minutes at length. This is very much the Sherlock format, and this is by the team, of course, who made Sherlock, so that makes sense. So we're actually going to break this into chunks, thirds, as it were. So we're going to actually start at the very beginning and break this down on an episode-per-episode basis, and then give a final score at the end of the entire series as a whole. Unlike our movies, which obviously we just kind of give like a definitive score on that movie. Yeah. So anyway, let's start with episode 1. So Hallie, you want to give us a little intro on that one?
Episode 1 covers basically the introduction to Dracula through the narrative of Jonathan Harker, the lawyer who is sent to Dracula's castle to help him settle affairs and get prepared to come to England. Which is how the book starts.
Yes.
Now, what I liked about this episode in particular is that it's a narrative being told by Jonathan Harker after he has escaped Dracula's castle. And he's telling this story to the nuns at a convent where he's been hiding.
Correct.
I love this because I have read the original Dracula. This should come as a surprise to absolutely nobody in the room.
Me too, actually. Yeah.
And the way that Dracula is written is that it's a series of journal entries and letters.
Yeah.
So it's all narratives told by different people as well. And they kind of stuck with that in this series, which is kind of cool.
It is really cool, and it does add to the allure and mysticism and also terror of that original Bram Stoker novel. It makes it extra terrifying to an audience reading that, because the readers, they feel like they're poring over something that they shouldn't be looking at.
Exactly, yeah.
And this episode does, like you say, cover a narrative very much from that perspective. Something else I really liked about the series as a whole that ties immediately into this episode: Jonathan Harker is the focal point for a very brief period of time, and then the fixation point shifts drastically to Dracula's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this show is very much, he's the main character.
Oh yeah,
Without a single bit of a doubt. Like,
he's the lead.
he's the lead, but that is unusual though, because typically he's the antagonist, and even though he's a focal point, he's never the audience's vessel. In this series, he very much is. And there's a reason for that, because of the liberties that are taken, obviously, with this series and what they do with the content. Because we should probably point out that even though this is definitely like inspired by the Bram Stoker novel, it's very much a loose translation of that, because it basically, this episode is the closest I think it gets to the novel, but it very quickly takes some pretty serious turns.
Yeah, like there are elements in the whole series that take from the novel, but for sure after the first episode it kind of goes off in its own little direction bit by bit.
Correct.
The character that I absolutely adore, and I think this is pretty obvious, is Sister Agatha.
Yeah. So
I loved her from the first quip she made. It was delightful.
the writing is really top notch from the perspective of the characters, and more specifically those two characters. So Klaus Bang plays the quintessential titular Dracula, and I guess we'll get into like our opinions on his portrayal of the character shortly enough. But I agree with you completely. I mirror your sentiment. I think the best thing in the show is Sister Agatha. So we already mentioned it, spoilers, of course. But we'll get into more on her character later, in some revelations and why she's so definitively important in this particular series, because she has some pretty serious connections to Dracula and the book itself, that make her even more interesting. This whole series, and what makes it good, is the cat and mouse game between her and Dracula.
Yeah, that was pretty much the thing that I loved about the series.
It's the hanging point of the whole thing. It's the idea of this high esteemed person of faith being just so vehemently against this sort of creature of the night, this demonic figure that is Dracula. Because I think it goes without saying that like Klaus Bang does a very good job in this portrayal. Like, it may not be to everyone's taste because it is a very different take on Dracula, but personally I think he did a very good job.
He did a very good job, it's true. And I love the fun nun. And I also appreciated that in this first episode in particular, they did keep a lot of bits from the novel as well, from the book. You know, the lines with the double meaning, like,
yes,
I don't drink wine.
Yeah.
You know, it's there's so many different little I understand what you actually mean when you say that moment.
I think tonally this episode is the best of the three in terms of tone, because it manages to ride that line perfectly between sort of like corny, over the top, hammy cheesiness, gothic, beautiful period piece, and really, really stark, beautiful horror.
Yeah.
It kind of like sits really nicely in that, and it rides that line. I really adored this first episode quite a lot, because the luscious way that the castle was orchestrated. I love the labyrinth that is the castle. It was my favorite thing in the whole episode.
It's great. And it's very much a gothic horror first episode. And I especially loved that Klaus was channeling. It really felt like I was watching him and I was like, oh my God, you're kind of channeling Bela Lugosi in a couple of these shots, like a couple of these scenes. And I was just like, oh, my little goth heart. Yeah.
He was very much channeling a combination of Bela Lugosi and Hannibal Lecter. It was very strange.
Yeah.
There was I got a lot of Hannibal Lecter, and I'm talking like Anthony Hopkins in this. There's, with a little bit of a charismatic sort of tinge of the Mads Mikkelsen interpretation in the TV series. There's a little bit of that in here, which I really, really adored, actually. I kind of like the take that they had on Dracula, because he genuinely felt threatening and seductive. Like, there's a certain way that you have to carry this character. He has to be convincingly alluring, and he also has to be convincingly terrifying. And I think that he did a very good job portraying both. So narratively, as Jonathan Harker, as we said, rides into the castle, we are introduced to our titular Dracula in a very interesting way, where he's very much weakened. He's in a state of complete and utter like decay. He's very old and disheveled, and of course this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, especially for those who read the book.
It's exactly how it starts.
Exactly, yeah. So he slowly starts draining Jonathan Harker, and basically as Jonathan becomes weaker and it starts decaying, Dracula becomes younger and eventually winds up back into his prime. This leads to some really interesting sort of horrific elements for the first half of this episode, leading up to a really, really exciting climax, where it's really Jonathan trying to uncover the mysteries around this castle and this character and who this figure is and what he has kept in that castle specifically and what his motivations are, which really is some of the scariest stuff in this whole series. And because it stays pretty true to form to the formatting of the book, which really, like, I know we'll get into this later, but I'm deeply bothered that they didn't stay on course with that. I'm okay with like taking some liberties, but oh man, this show gets into some territory later that I'm uncomfortable with.
Just a little.
But more on the positives.
Yeah. It was a great setup for the first episode. I enjoyed that there were some twists in it as well.
It was good writing.
It was pretty solid writing. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
So do you want to unveil one of the big twists, which deals with your favorite character?
Yes, I do. So, we're following this nun, Sister Agatha, and as she is acting very much not like a nun, which is fantastic.
Right from the get-go.
Right from the get-go. And she is, in fact, Sister Agatha Van Helsing, which is revealed, which I kind of started to suspect. I was like, okay, I see what you're doing here. Nice
little gender swap of that character, because Van Helsing in the novel, of course, is male. Coincidentally, Anthony Hopkins plays this character in the 2000 or the 1990s.
Yeah,
Dracula.
the Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman and Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder. Just,
I kind of love that movie.
It is. It's a hot mess, but I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
It's great. But anyway, we're not talking about that one.
No, we are not.
No. So she is revealed to be the Van Helsing character in this, which was great. And there's another twist in there too, where it's discovered that Jonathan Harker didn't actually really escape.
No.
As much as he showed up at the convent. He died.
Yes.
He was made undead and then arrived at the convent.
Yes. Which winds up getting used in a really horrific fashion. The rules of Dracula is some of the more fascinating things of this series, because they take some liberties with those. Some of it is canon with the book, some of it's not. There's one particular scene that I really wanted to draw attention to in this episode, and for me, it was kind of like the gold star of the whole thing. Other than the castle itself, which I love the sort of bending, twisting nature of like getting lost in the maze of that castle, I loved the transformation sequence out of the dog.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew it.
Fuck.
It is definitely not a clean and romantic transformation like in previous versions.
Nope.
Like, it's not just a quick cut and he's suddenly a man. He climbs out of this wolf dog. Like,
brutal.
It is grotesque to watch, which is actually really kind of refreshing.
I really liked it.
Not to say that I, enjoyed it a great deal, but I thought that it was a really good, different take.
I loved it. I thought it was one of the most interesting transformation sequences.
Well, you know what I'm like with dogs in movies.
I know.
I don't like seeing dogs hurt or die or...
The dog was never a dog,
I know, but dog. No, puppy, stop whining. Oh, God.
I don't give a shit. You can climb out of as many dogs as you want as long as you do it like that.
Terrible.
Can I get that on the shirt?
Oh, no.
Anyway, it was an amazing effect. It reminded me a lot of many of the 80s inspired werewolf transformations. It was very visceral and very violent, and the timing of it was perfect, because basically these nuns are held up and ready to go to siege war with this demonic creature, and his entrance couldn't have been better. And then he climbs out of this thing.
And he's
just
stark naked.
Butt naked.
That's
and
it.
covered in blood. And he's just pining for them. He's like heavy breathing.
Oh my
just
God.
At the
so
gates.
awkward.
And while Van Helsing is just...
She's just like, you're naked and a man. They're not
snickering.
avoiding your gaze.
That's
That's
right.
not what they're avoiding looking at.
Her wit and sarcasm and playfulness with the character at this stage going forward just really made the show for me. And this is where I was like completely like, okay, no, I'm on board with this version of this show. I really, really like what they're doing here. And it really stuck the landing with this episode. Like it was solidly executed, had some really, really good twists and turns, and how Dracula inevitably winds up basically on the offensive and on the attack of this commune, and inevitably conquers the commune.
Unfortunately.
Is quite horrific and very, very well done. I was very entertained.
Yeah, it was really, really well done.
So I guess we move into episode 2.
Yeah, that's right. Because, episode 1 ends and unfortunately, since Dracula gets inside, he manages to get to Sister Agatha and Mina Harker, who was summoned by Sister Agatha to help save Jonathan, who doesn't make it.
No.
Which is a very different end for him than the book.
Well, because Jonathan makes it all the way through.
He does in the actual
in the novel.
story,
yeah.
But in order to keep it fresh, it's the same but different.
Of course.
You gotta do same but different for sure.
And like the rules that they play with are really interesting, which does blend into the second episode
exactly
quite well.
Because the end of the first episode ends with Sister Agatha and Mina facing off against Dracula, who's just tearing his way out of Jonathan's skin. That's
fucking
really
brutal.
Again, that's it's kind of a gross transformation, but it works.
It sets a precedent for the direction of this particular show itself, and what the liberties that they're taking with this character. And really, like, as an intro to a new take on this character, I thought this was a very effective episode. It hit all of the gothic horror angles that I really liked. I really enjoyed the rules that they put in place with the character. Dracula, and this does blend into the second episode quite a lot, because it plays a huge role into, I guess, the direction of the character in this episode, because it is a very self-contained environment. But Dracula doesn't just drain his victims. He chooses his victims wisely. He picks people that are of intellectual prowess, and this is supposedly what has kept him alive for so long, because he's been very, very picky about his food. Air quotes,
yeah, he's
so
been kept alive and sane. That's something that they really underscore in this. Is he mentions that there's undead, and then there's like undead. Like you're either mindless and ravenous, or you are like him, intellectual. You think, you have consciousness of some kind.
Yes,
so
because there are examples in his castle of the ravenous type of undead that actually play a huge role in sort of like drawing that line in the sand in seeing what Dracula could have become if he hadn't been as picky. And then also there's the angle of each victim that he drains, he gains knowledge from them. So, for example, his English accent is something that he actually gains from Jonathan Harker, and he makes sure to utilize this particular skill set a number of times in episode 2, because episode 2 takes place on the ship Demeter, I think it's called.
Yes, the Demeter.
Yeah, and this is Dracula's journey to England, because he wants to be in with the hip crowd. He's like, he's very much like, England is so like sophisticated and intellectual. Right. So I need to go to England to eat everybody.
And this is, again, the narrative is told not directly, but the episode starts out with Sister Agatha and Dracula sitting down in supposedly his castle to play a game of chess that's already started.
Yes.
So they're talking about him and the events and everything, which will come into importance later. But again, it's that narrative being told, just like the journal entries, like the letters. It's the two of them talking about this stuff happening.
Yes.
So I like that they kept that theme in episode 1 and 2.
Yeah, no, I really like that too. And really the chess match between these two characters is very much analogous and a metaphor for the whole show.
Oh, yeah.
It's because a lot of what the intrigue and what makes this show very watchable from start to finish is the relationship between these two characters. They're very conflicting ideologies. They sit on two opposite ends of the same coin kind of deal. So for the episode to start in this way, it was really interesting because we know where we left off, which was Sister Agatha basically at the mercy of Dracula.
That's right. But that's not where the episode begins. So, you're left with that little gap in going, what happened here?
Yeah, so it immediately takes place on the Demeter with a full cast of ripe produce.
Yeah, and I love that when he sits down, he's like, oh, well, I'll tell you the story, but it's got a cast of colorful characters, but don't get attached to many of them.
Which I
love
thought that was fun.
That was great. It's like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks for the spoiler alert, buddy.
I'm on the fence of whether episode 2 I like more than 1. I really like 2.
I really liked, I think I like 2 more than 1, honestly.
Yeah. It's more entertaining.
It is, because the characters in 2 are very different.
Totally.
And it's a full cast, and I love the setting. Mm-hmm. There's something really terrifying about a ship. Now, I'm afraid of dark water anyway.
Sure, yeah.
But you are on a ship, you have nowhere else to go, and there's a murderer on the ship, which is essentially what happens. People start disappearing.
And not just any murderer, like literally an unstoppable villain.
Yeah.
And there's nothing they can do at all. Like, they're completely helpless. And I love the way Klaus Bang plays the character in this episode because he's just so completely cocky and just manipulating everyone on the ship. And it takes them forever to figure out exactly what's going on. And it's Sister Agatha, of course, later on, which we'll reveal is on the ship.
Yes, indeed.
So the big twist in this episode, from a writing standpoint, and we'll double back and sort of talk about the gist of how the episode functions, but it is really interesting that Sister Agatha in the opening sequence is actually being drained on this ship. And they show this with Jonathan Harker in the first episode, where there's this hallucinogenic quality to being drained, where you basically hallucinate and see almost like a dreamscape of your fondest memories while you're being drained by Dracula. Mm-hmm. So she's in basically a comatose state of being in conversation with Dracula in this chess match while being drained on the ship. And because there's this super top secret room on the ship that you're wondering, what's in that room, and
who's in that room, what's going on.
Yeah, because only the captain can go in, and that's
cabin number 9.
Yeah, it's very spooky. And then it's revealed later on that our definitive hero, Van Helsing, is actually on the ship, and that's when this episode takes a turn, because up until that point, this is very much a slasher movie on a ship with an unstoppable villain, and it's from the perspective of the unstoppable villain, and that stuff.
Wait, Jason was on the ship?
It might as well have been. I absolutely love that stuff because he's basically just slowly working his way through these people. He doesn't care about any of them, but the show does. Mm-hmm. The show bothers to actually just dangle them in front of your face briefly enough, give you enough insight and information about each of the characters to get you to like them just so they can kill them in front of your face.
And I mean, at the end of the day, 2 people managed to make it off the ship without dying.
In the lifeboat, yeah.
In the lifeboat. Everybody else kind of dies.
Yeah.
One way or another, either by Dracula or people helping Dracula,
Yep.
because there's a bit of that going on.
Oh yeah,
why wouldn't there be?
Back and forth, twisty, turny writing. It's got a little bit of. And we just watched this recently as a group, but it reminds me a little bit of John Carpenter's The Thing, where it's in an isolated space in a very remote location that's already dangerous unto itself. Mm-hmm. And you have a cast of characters who don't really trust one another, and there is a major omnipresent threat that threatens them all and makes them question their own sanity. It's very well constructed. It's very well written, and juxtaposes really, really well against that first episode, which was more leaning into the period-based gothic horror trappings of the Bram Stoker novel. This is taking a totally different turn, where it's it still falls into that period aesthetic, but the environment's different. It feels different. Mm-hmm. The tone is shifted a little bit. Gone is the cheesy corniness of the first episode, and now it's just straight up a slasher. It's a lot of fun, and for horror fans, I think this episode will be a total winner.
Yeah.
So do you want to lean into the climax and subsequently how this thing ends?
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole thing is eventually it's revealed that Sister Agatha's on the ship, and she manages to convince people while threatened being lynched that she is in fact not the monster. First, she convinces them that, yes, she is a vampire to stop them from hanging her, because she's like, oh, it's not going to stop me. I'm going to come back. And then says, it was actually this guy over here, the Count. He's the vampire. And then they start turning on him, which of course he escapes.
Mm-hmm.
And they decide the only way to really be sure that nothing is going to make it to England, none of this plague, none of this evil, to sink the ship.
Yeah.
And she succeeds.
Yeah, she actually wins.
She does, yes. She loses her life. Sister Agatha dies in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's believed that Dracula dies as well, except he didn't. And this is where the big twist comes in, because I loved this. I thought this was really amazing. He manages to make his way out of the box of dirt underwater, make his way back to shore, and he's standing on the shore, and you can see the ruins of an abbey on the hill, and you're like, wow, yeah, great, he made it to England. Ah, shit. And then a helicopter shows up, and he's suddenly front and center, and SUVs show up, and somebody who looks remarkably like Sister Agatha walks up to him and just says, "Hello, Count Dracula." And it's just like, what now?
What? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great twist. It's like, oh shit, 123 years have actually passed since that incident. Sick.
It was undeniably shocking, but I was scared from the start.
Oh, yeah?
Which will segue nicely into episode 3.
Yes. So episode 3.
This is where it drops the ball.
You notice we've been singing praises about this show right up until now.
This show is filled with twists and turns, and we even have a twist for you.
The twist is we didn't like this.
No, this last episode
was terrible.
It completely screws the pooch. It actually ruins the whole thing.
It really does. I was so disappointed, and let's talk about why.
Oh yeah,
so
there's a lot to talk about here.
There is so much to talk about here. It's hard to unpack it all in whatever 15-20 minutes we've got left of
well,
this.
Hallie, you did such a good job of wrapping up that last episode, so why don't you dive into the opening of this episode, because you technically segued that really nicely. So I last left off, and I'm just going to point out one last time, I was scared from the start because timey-wimey jumps scare me.
I was surprised. I liked it. And I was a little bit worried. And apparently I had good reason to be. So Dracula walks up on shore. Apparently it's her great-great-grandniece or whatever.
Something like that.
This new character who looks remarkably like Sister Agatha is a relative. And her name is Zoe Van Helsing.
You could say
Zoe Helsing.
You could say it's the same actress.
You could. In fact, I would. Which I am in full support of any show that reuses actors and actresses in different ways. I'm just all for it. Keep them working.
Especially one this good.
Especially one as good as Dolly Wells. So, we've got Dracula on shore, and he's just beside himself because how long have I been asleep for? And when he finds out, he's like, that's great. Oh, this is amazing. You guys have evolved so much.
He's so pumped.
And he takes a video camera from one of the mercenaries that's with Zoe, and of course ends up shooting that mercenary and escaping. Because
he turns into a bunch of bats, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's pretty classic.
I think what makes this episode so fucking frustrating is that there are some good ideas in here and interesting, thought-provoking concepts that you could play around with this character, bringing them into a modern landscape, and really playing with the psyche of the character, and actually by bringing them into modern day landscape, they're actually pulling some things out of the character that you wouldn't be able to get in the period setting.
No,
but
they dropped the ball. They screwed the pooch on
Completely.
this. It's incredible. They could have gone in so many different directions, and they went in this one that I'll tell you the moment that they lost me. So Dracula escapes that initial meeting.
I already know which point it lost you.
Ends up at a farmhouse.
Yeah.
And that's where you really find out more about how he absorbs memories and knowledge from the people he kills, because he's killed this woman's husband,
Yes.
who was abusive and an asshole, so whatever.
So he learns about the internet.
He learns about all these things from this dead husband.
Yeah.
And he ends up getting caught in a situation where he either goes with Van Helsing, getting into his box of dirt, or he's going to get fried by the sun.
Yeah, because we obviously sunlight kills Dracula. Like,
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Obviously. And anyway, he actually does attack Zoe Van Helsing.
He bites her, but has a very negative reaction.
Very negative reaction, and ends up getting caught by the Jonathan Harker Foundation.
Yeah, it's revealed that there are some other characters that are actually in the book that are playing like teenagers in a modern day setting.
Yeah.
And one of them gets a phone call from Jonathan Harker, and I'm like, is he alive? That's
but
impossible.
No, it's actually just the Foundation that's calling him.
Who is basically hell-bent on finding, restoring, and researching Dracula. Like, they want to basically dissect him from the inside out and understand him.
Yeah.
So
which,
they
fair enough. Okay, I guess. I mean, kind of cruel, but whatever. He kills people and eats them. And
yeah, that's fine.
Whatever.
So basically, they, like you said, they managed to actually capture him. But
here's the moment.
Oh, my God. Well, okay, first, before we get into the moment, I should point out that the way Dracula was recovered from the ship to begin with, he was actually comatose at the bottom of the ocean, and the Jonathan Harker Foundation sent a team of divers who decided it would be a really cool idea to shove their fingers in his mouth, I guess.
And she loses a thumb in the process, but because of that surge of blood, he's now waking up. I think it was something like 10 hours later. He awakened.
It basically it brought him back to life out of his comatose state. And now that he's been captured in a giant Hannibal Lecter-esque cell, this is where the show completely falls off the rails.
Yep. Here's the moment that it completely lost me.
Mm-hmm.
Zoe Helsing is in the cell with him, talking to him, and then suddenly a man shows up with, I think it's the director of the program.
Mark Gatiss.
Yeah, shows up and says he's Dracula's lawyer and that this is against his rights to hold him against his will. And that was it. That was the moment for me. I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Not just that. They actually succeed in this logic. They let him go.
Like, what? Are you kidding me?
He's a mass murdering killer.
Oh, but no bodies were ever found, so they're just missing.
What?
Yeah,
and then on top of that, like, okay, first of all, I have so many problems with this entire scene. The lawyer was just the icing on the cake, as far as I'm concerned, because they give Dracula a fucking iPad so he can read books.
And even Zoe was like, who gave him the Wi-Fi password?
This is the writing in this episode. The
writing is so terrible.
Oh my God. The show went from like seemingly knowing what it was doing, having a lot of solid inspiration with the Bram Stoker material, and then taking some liberties and having fun with it. It was very tongue-in-cheek and lavish in its production. Then we get to this episode, and it's like, what the fuck? Is this the same people that wrote this? Like, what happened? Like,
everything about it just felt wrong.
Like, even the performances were really weird, because like Dracula, like he's like, oh, I used this iPad you gave me, and I hacked into the internet, and I was just checking out all this really cool stuff, and I thought I would contact my lawyer, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
it really
so stupid.
It really upset me, because I went from kind of liking this character, the Dracula character, to disliking him. Like,
absolutely.
Even from like, okay, accepting that he's a villain and everything, even as a villain, I don't like him.
No.
He became very pretentious to an excessive point.
Yes.
Like, he just became very arrogant and too modern. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to describe what he became.
Well,
it started showing up in the second episode, and I was like, okay, well, maybe. But he was starting to feel like a total fish out of water. Like, he was out of his timeline. Okay, yes, he is, but the whole character turned around for me, and I did not like him.
But this is the problem. He's a fish out of water without any of the fish out of water trappings that make his character fun, because they eliminated those.
Yeah.
He devours a regular old house husband or whatever, and then suddenly he just knows everything about modern day landscape.
Skyler, he goes on Tinder.
I was going to get to that, because that was another point where I was ready to just jump off the bridge. He's swiping through Tinder to find victims, and he can't take a photo of himself.
No, it's just that point they lost me, and unfortunately they never got me back on board. I was actually waiting for the episode to end, because it wasn't just that annoyed me. It was a lot of things. It's that they let him go, and Zoe basically throws in her hat at that point and says, okay, well, I'm dying of cancer, so I'm just going to go do that and let this go.
That was the reason why Dracula had such a negative reaction to the blood, of course.
Yes, it's because she's dying, yeah. So he can't drink from sick people, apparently, like people who have a disease of some kind. Which is weird. Like, it makes sense.
It does. But
if he's so used to pure, like, specific blood.
But don't we all have, like, a little cancer in us?
I don't know, man.
I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
Not a doctor. But it's... Yeah, they never got me back. And I thought it was interesting that they did incorporate those characters from the book. Lucy and Jack and Quincy. They all end up coming in as 20-something-year-olds. And, you know, Jack's in love with Lucy. Lucy gets engaged to this American Quincy, who's...
Mr. Douchebag Man, yeah.
Who doesn't actually seem to love her, but proposes to her for some reason. Yeah, it just doesn't work for me. It fell off the rails.
Yeah, well, because basically from the lawyer scene onward, it just gets stupid because it breaks its own rules in favor of rules that don't make sense, all culminating and building towards a very nonsensical and very... It's not entertaining. Like, it's just not... It's a very questionable finale, and, like, I really want to dive deep into the finale, but not yet, because there's still some pieces that
there are
missing.
Some pieces that we haven't covered.
So the Lucy character, let's get into that a little bit here. So Lucy is a fascinating character because she has this fixation or obsession with death. Like, she's not afraid to die, and she's also completely, almost on a very chemical level, addicted to the hallucinogenic quality that we mentioned before of Dracula's, I guess, his draining, like his seductive draining. So in a weird sort of creepy Tinder date sequence of him constantly meeting up with Lucy in a graveyard, because that's just the hottest place to meet for a date, I guess. It leads to her being slowly drained and then killed. And this leads into our finale, where Zoe is basically, all of her cards are she's basically like put all of her cards on the table, and she's running out of options since she doesn't know how to defend herself against this creature.
Except she's also, by this point, consumed his blood.
Yes.
She took a sample of his blood that she drank, which struck me as a little odd. They didn't go further with that. Basically, because Dracula consumed Agatha in the past, her memories and her spirit become a part of him and his blood. So when Zoe drinks the blood, she then gets to converse with Agatha, with the memories of Agatha. And the odd thing is that consuming vampire blood in the original mythos, you know, vampire drinks from you, you drink from the vampire, then on the verge of death, you become that master vampire kind of creature. But that doesn't happen with Zoe.
No.
I would have thought that Dracula's blood would have defeated the cancer or given her some sort of second lease, some extension, something. I mean, he consumes blood and absorbs memories, but she consumes his blood and gets some memories, but that's it.
It's very fragmented.
So
she gets basically some leftover puzzle pieces that she inevitably uses in the finale to, I guess, defeat Dracula, but that kind of plays into some rules. So we all know the rules of Dracula here. No sunlight.
No crosses.
No crosses.
No reflection.
Nope.
Although we covered that one already. It's he can see a reflection, but it's real ugly.
Stakes to the heart, I guess. Like, work on some underlings, perhaps, but maybe not him. I think they work. I'm not sure.
Holy relics keep him at bay. He has to be invited in.
Yes, the being invited in. These are all rules that are defined in the source material and also in the show up until a point. And there's one really interesting one that they keep fixating on. Like, Dracula is obsessed with the sun and being able to see the sun. And there's a scene where he looks at the television and he's staring at the sun, and it's like the most beautiful thing he's ever seen, which I actually liked.
Yeah, that was a really nice touch.
I thought that was really nice. And then the cross is the one that they keep coming back to.
Yeah.
And it's basically mentioned in the second episode that Dracula supposedly is scared of the cross due to consuming a large quantity of religious fear-mongering people over decades.
Which I thought was really
I thought
clever.
that was really cool.
Yeah.
As a logical reason for him being terrified of the cross, without just being a holy divinity thing and him being like a demonic creature of some sort, like, and being repelled by such things, it's a more logical explanation for this that I actually quite liked. The finale,
Right up until they erased that theory.
well, the finale, if you are still following us and understanding why we've been upset with all the shitty writing in this episode and bringing Dracula into a modern landscape altogether is just being a bad idea right from the get-go. The ending really is the nail in the coffin.
Haha.
See what I did there?
I did, yeah.
Because they basically kiboshed the whole thing.
Yep. All these people believe these legends about you, and so you've started to believe them.
And
that's it. They don't actually exist. And she like tears the curtain down, and sunlight comes pouring in, and he screeches and he falls to the floor and writhes, but he's not burning.
Nope.
Because it's all in his head. He's just afraid of dying.
Yeah, which leads into the ultimate weakness of Dracula is he's scared to die, which is just the weakest, lamest, most bullshit cop-out writing for a finale to this show that you could possibly give.
It really was.
Because, like, there's some ideas there that I can sort of get behind, but most of it falls completely flat.
It doesn't work if you've built it up in a completely different direction the whole time.
Especially where the audience has already been introduced to these rules and have already been really, like, taken interest into the rules of Dracula. Like, these are just embedded into culture. So to just completely pull the rug out from underneath of us and then make it into a situation where basically these are all just falsified fears that he's just gathered in his head over time, that really just takes away from this character.
It does. It takes away from, I guess, the menace almost. It's like, oh, you're actually just afraid to die like the rest of us.
He's a coward.
That's it.
They make him into a coward because basically all his lineage, his family lineage, have all died on the battlefield. And because of this, he's terrified to die. So he basically he stalks in the shadows and skulks about and devours people because he's scared to die. He's scared of his own mortality, and which is why he fears the cross, because the cross is like an access point. It's like going into the unknown, unafraid, and accepting your death.
Yeah. And so in the end, Zoe accepts her death. She's literally dying in his presence.
On the table.
On the table. And he consumes her. He starts drinking her blood, even though it's going to kill him, so that the two of them end up dying together.
And they show the hallucinogenic sequence of like when he's devouring her.
And they're like having sex. And
yeah, like they're basically embracing each other in the sun. Now, granted, the one thing I'll give this finale is there is probably one of my favorite shots in the whole series. I just wish it wasn't handled this way. I wish it wasn't handled with all this shitty writing backing it up. The sequence of Dracula stepping into the light and the shadows from the window panes form a cross. It's him.
Yeah, I saw that.
That's a beautiful shot.
It is. There are a lot of beautiful shots in this
because
series.
it's him basically. It's him embracing those two fears that he's had for a long time: the cross and the sunlight.
Absolutely.
At the same time, and that's a really great use of visual storytelling. I just wish it wasn't in service of this super shitty slap together junk.
It just didn't work, because basically what it's done is it's made me, or it made the viewers feel like they just wasted all this time they invested in the foundations of your story.
Pretty much, yeah.
Because you've gone, I actually didn't build this. It's this instead.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work for me.
No, me neither.
So I absolutely adored the first two episodes and the twist at the end of the second episode. And I enjoyed like the first 5 or 10 minutes of the third. Mm-hmm. And then everything after that was just a mess to me.
They just didn't stick the landing.
No, they didn't.
It falls apart.
It does. You know, there was kind of a touching sequence there with Lucy when because she was cremated, except, you know, she was undead. Dracula turned her into a vampire, one of his, and she escapes and she's just a charred mess from the fire. But that's how she's going to stay.
Yes.
Which is another strange thing, because Dracula can heal himself. So why can't she heal herself?
It made no sense. And I understand that she's an underling of sorts, but then...
Of sorts.
But she should still be able to do something about that. And then on top of that, they do a a really cheap, gimmicky effect of
It
the
was
stab.
so Buffy.
The Buffy the Vampire Slayer effect of Blue.
It worked.
Eventually,
She just crumbles into ashes. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, that works in Buffy, but that's not how I imagined this going
but
here.
it's not consistent with
No.
this miniseries, because in the first episode, another vampire that was held captive gets stabbed in the heart and doesn't turn into dust.
No.
And so what were they thinking?
That's right. One
It
of his
does-
other brides. And it's just like, wait, what?
Yeah.
The consistency was off. Like it was, I don't know, maybe it was different writers on this episode, but the story just flopped. And there was no saving it for me at that point.
No.
I thought maybe, if they have some really good explanations as to why he fears the sun, why these things happen. Okay, maybe. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I absolutely adore Dracula 2000.
Yeah.
Is because they explain a background for Dracula, and I think it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I thought it was really well done.
There's a lot of interpretations of this character that I really love, and this is a character that is timeless, and the iconography is unmistakable.
Yeah.
And the rule sets, they're embedded into pop culture, and you can bring this character into 2020 as clearly shown in the first 2 episodes, because these are very effective, very well produced, exciting horror television. But they just got a little too ambitious with their storytelling and tried really, really hard to be gimmicky and doing something. They were almost too clever for their own damn good.
I felt like they were trying to be too trendy.
Yes.
They were trying too hard to appeal to.
Well, look at who's writing it. So I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I like a lot of Sherlock, and I love Doctor Who, parts of it, but they do have some unmistakable trappings in their writing, and they wear it on their sleeve here.
Yeah, it didn't work. So a little disappointed in the end. Well, a lot disappointed in the end. I do love Dracula. It's one of my favorite stories, and
Yeah,
I
me
love
too.
seeing the different versions of Dracula. And
Well, that was why we wanted to cover this, because it's something to us that's very inspiring, and it was a big letdown to see how they sort of mishandled this
Yeah.
in the end, on such a strong opening too.
yeah, really solid opening. I was really engaged with episode 1. They had me at the end of episode 2, and then
Yeah, they shit the bed. They popped out of the dog violently. They yeah.
I wish people could see my expression, but they can't.
I don't
So
know where I'm going with that.
anyway, so I guess we're gonna do a score.
We are going to do a score. So this score is for the show as a whole. Now, there's a lot to sort of equate to our thought process here, because again, we did like a lot of this show, so it's hard to associate a score to a show like this. But that 3rd episode put a bitter taste in our mouth. So my score for the show, I have to give it a very modest 7 out of 10.
Ha! That's what I was gonna give it to.
Okay, fair enough.
It's basically like I kind of divided 10 in 3 parts, right? And I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Full marks for the first, full marks for the second, but you get 1 point.
That's how I did it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was very like-minded with you on this, because that last episode is just a shit pile.
It really is.
It has the only thing good I can say about it is that it has some interesting ideas. They don't work. They're
No.
not gelled or written properly. They don't formulate well enough, and it also takes away from the previous 2 episodes that were well handled.
Yeah.
So it does the worst thing that an ending can do.
It just completely undermines everything that went before it.
That's right. So this is not an enthusiastic 7 from me. This is
No.
tread carefully, because you're going to be probably disappointed.
Yeah.
Enjoy, if anything, maybe just watch the first 2 episodes and then just say, it's over, that's it. And then just kind of stop there, because you don't need to watch that 3rd episode.
You know what? Write your own 3rd episode.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be better.
Fan fiction.
Fan fiction.
That's what fan fiction's for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 7 out of 10 is from us.
Yep.
It's not like a glowing review, but it is a review nonetheless. That it comes with an asterisk where tread carefully.
Yep.
This could have been a very easily like an 8 or a 9 from us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, Dracula is one of my favorite supernatural antagonists. And like I said, I've seen a lot of different versions and iterations. I've seen, Gary Oldman. I've seen Gerard Butler. I've seen Alucard, because Helsing's great. Yeah, so I've seen a lot of different versions of Dracula, Bela Lugosi and stuff, and the actor playing Dracula, Klaus Bang, did a great job with what he had, but the character mid-episode 2 started to be too modern in his dialogue.
Yes.
And his mannerisms. Our modern, still in that time frame where he hadn't consumed anybody yet. Yeah. From our timeline.
I agree.
So why is he acting like that? Why is he speaking like that? Like, he shouldn't be that way.
There are a lot of very interesting questions you can pull out of the latter half of this show. Just baffling writing decisions. And I agree with you completely. The writing, I find that the writing in the period setting was handled very well. And all of that dialogue was super well written and it made a lot of sense. Everything was really clear. And then as soon as they tried to get too modern, it felt very out of touch. Yeah. Especially in the third episode where they were just making really vain attempts to try and be modern and hip and cool and bringing Dracula into the foray of that. It just... so many attempts just completely falling flat.
Yeah. And the changes did start. I remember starting to notice them in episode 2 and going, okay, curb it back a little, guys. You're a little too modern. And then it turns out, he ends up in modern day. And I'm like, okay, well, now it would be okay.
At least it's appropriate.
But then it still doesn't work.
Because the writing's bad.
The writing wasn't great, no.
So that's our review on Dracula, and that pretty much sums up our episode for the week. We promise that we will get back to our double feature format soon enough. We will be back into movie land here coming into February because there's some bigger releases coming out.
And of course, we do have a remake Rumble coming up in the not too distant future, which I think people are gonna like it. I think it's gonna be a fun one.
We may have some plans for that already.
We may have some plans. We also have some plans for some other stuff coming out.
Absolutely.
But as always, thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the show, hey, thanks for stopping by. Come back. Everyone. Come listen to us again. And if you'd like to follow us on Facebook, we've got our Facebook page, Eldritch Creative. You can suggest movies for us to watch and review. You can suggest content ideas. You know what? Just hit us up. Post something. Talk to us. Let us know what you like, what you don't like.
Send us an electronic email.
Yeah, you could do that too, I suppose. I don't think I've ever given out the email on this show.
Oh. Oh, that's fun.
So our email address is really complicated, guys. eldritchcreative@gmail.com.
I love it.
Right?
I can remember that.
Can you?
And if I can remember that, you can remember that.
So send us an email if you have any questions or anything. We also are on Instagram at eldritch.creative. And, of course, Twitter, which I absolutely love, Eldritch Create.
She hates it.
I hate it so much. Anyway, but that's okay. For you guys, I'd go on Twitter. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time.
See you next time, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.